So I wanted to go ahead and start. Welcome everyone for joining today's webinar, Botanical Supply Sustainability in the Time of COVID. I'm very grateful for our participants, for all of you joining, and also for the panelists whom I'll introduce in a moment. But first I want to say a little bit about this webinar series. This particular webinar is the second in what we're calling the Sustainable Herbs Program, Sustainability and Regenerative Practices Toolkit webinar series. And the goal of this series is really to look at key questions in sustainability and regenerative practices in the botanical industry. And this is part of the launch of this toolkit, which is a collection of best practices and is available on the Sustainable Herbs Program website under Take Action. It can be downloaded for free. Yesterday was the first in this series, and that was a conversation with Dr. Tiarone Lodog. And to me, that really set the stage because it started with talking about personal wellness, and that personal wellness depends on family, community, and planetary wellness, which is really the reason for this industry in the first place. And that webinar the recording of that is available, and that will be also on the Sustainable Herbs Program website. And it was a fabulous conversation, so well worth your time. And then we're also launching another series, which is in partnership with American Botanical Council. And this is a series on ethnobotany, and that'll be conversations with key figures in the world of ethnobotany. And we're really excited that that will launch with a conversation with Doctors Michael Ballack and Paul Allen Cox around the time of the release of their new book, Plants, People, and Culture, The Science of Ethnobotany. And that will be September 17th. And then on October 1st, there'll be a webinar, which will be a conversation on the business of sustainability, and we'll have more information on that soon. And these webinars are all made possible through the generous support of our underwriters, the Sustainable Herbs Program underwriters. And this information is all also available on the Sustainable Herbs Program website. So thank you. And with that, I wanted to turn to today's conversation, and which is really looking at the impact of COVID on the botanical industry and the lessons learned, how we can use this as an opportunity to build a really sustainable and regenerative future. In the news, there's lots of information about the tremendous growth, which can be good, but it is not necessarily good. A mentor and dear friend of mine, Dana Meadows, always talked about how you also have to ask growth of what, for whom, impacting who, what are the impacts, paid for by whom, and paid for when. And so I really hope those are some of the issues we can talk about. And I wanted to introduce the panelists here. Ajay Patel, who is the co-founder and president of Verdure Sciences. And Verdure is an ingredient supplier that has a particular emphasis on scientific rigor, quality, and secure supply chains. And welcome, Ajay.
Thank you.
And I also want, thank you. And for the audience, if Ajay steps off, video turns off, it's because he has spotty internet, but he'll still stay on the call. And then I'd also like to welcome Loren Israelsen. And Loren is the president of the United Natural Products Alliance. And he's been deeply involved in commercial and regulatory issues facing the dietary supplement industry since 1982. So thank you, Loren, for sharing your time. And then Angela Mcawee, and Angela is the president and CEO of Gaia Herbs. And as most of the participants I'm sure know, Gaia is a leading herbal company that's really stepped forward in sustainable and transparent sourcing with their Meet Your Herbs program in their organic farm in North Carolina. So welcome, thank you all for coming. And I really wanted to start in with asking from your perspective, and I wanted to start with you, Loren, because as working for the trade association, a more industry-wide perspective. But from your perspective, what do you see right now in the industry with how COVID is impacting things?
Well, it's been an interesting experience for all of us. The first thing I would say is that we all entered the February, early March period with just unbelievable amounts of uncertainty. We were all debating what to do. For us, from a trade association perspective, the vital question is whether or not our industry would be recognized as critical infrastructure and essential goods. And on that decision would rest whether our factories would be open or not. And we were fortunate that we were recognized as such. That kept everyone operating. But that brought with it its own set of challenges. How do you protect your staff and your people? How do you really run an operation with really running in the dark? It was a stress test of things to come, in my opinion. Suddenly we found ourselves with FDA shutting down inspections. And then there's no travel. We can't do audits. We can't certify. We can't go physically see where our products and plants are coming from. So then we had massive logistics problems. China went down at the worst possible moment on their big national holiday with over 600 million people traveling in the wrong place, couldn't get back home, couldn't get back to work. That created a tremendous shortage of raw materials compounded by logistics. All the ships and all the containers were in the wrong places. Unprecedented series of events that happened. Consumer demand shot up. What it taught us is what we have seen before historically in times of great health crisis, people immediately go stock up on supplements, immediately. And we saw that at record levels. Then we also know the inevitable, the unfortunate inevitable of short stocks equals adulteration. And that was my greatest concern then and now. Going forward, as an industry, we have to really decide what our role is, not just in COVID-19, but our place in the broad spectrum of healthcare itself. Everything from why can't we use an HSA card to buy supplements? Just that alone is a significant question. The other one is we saw regulators dive bomb in and send over 350 warning letters, a lot to practitioners. And it raised the question of what can we communicate with respect to something like COVID? What's our role? Is it prevention? Is it to maintain a strong, healthy base to work with, as we have seen and has been discussed? Those that had underlying conditions were the hardest hit. I've been very interested talking to practitioners that when it comes to things like cytokine storms and post-recovery, this is where we excel. And botanicals have a long history of antiviral use and benefits. Then we ran into oleandrin. And it's just been, for me, just a remarkable experience dealing with regulators, politicians, media, global supply chain problems. But as I would say, and I believe this was really just a warm-up, a stress test for what comes when we begin to see the real effects of climate change.
Yeah, thank you. Ajay, do you want to contribute what you see from in the supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. So Verdure's corporate headquarters are in the US, but then we have our manufacturing partners and operations that are primarily located in India, especially with our focus being botanicals of Indian or Ayurvedic origin. So being a global player, we got wind of COVID-19 early on, January to early February. We as a company took immediate proactive measures to work both internally, preparing for remote working, implementing our sanitation practices, enhancing communications across our core network, and most importantly, setting up a task force that included leaders from supply chain, quality compliance, and customer service sales. With our manufacturing partner operations, what we started doing is, again, trying to be proactive, ramping up on feedstock raw materials, increasing our production capacities in conjunction with some of the working closely with our customers that understand the long-term needs for these key ingredients or botanicals. For Verdure, the major impact came as a result of increase in logistics costs, particularly to and from Asia. As Loren mentioned, there was this big impact on China, which is where it started, And then that led into a lot of the shutdowns, a lot of the disruption in the freight industry. And that had a major impact with respect to movement of cargo back and forth, even from the United States to Asia and back. Also, the limitation of passenger air traffic, that contributed significantly to this issue, as a lot of cargo moves on passenger airplanes. Then switching to India, India had a countrywide shutdown that began on March 24th and actually lasted until June 1st. It was indeed unprecedented because the country had never experienced anything like it before. As one can imagine, it was a total lockdown, which impacted movement of people, goods, and business operations, except for a very few essential businesses. The transportation, public transportation, including flights, were stopped, and it was a chaotic mess. Again, one can imagine a country of 1.3 billion people coming to literally a standstill. Fortunately, in our case, Verdura's manufacturing operations and partners were granted essential business status, like many of us in the industry, that allowed us to operate within days of those initial lockdowns. However, it was extremely challenging for the workers to travel both to the factories, coming back and forth, since each person needed a pass to get through security at almost every corner of the street, which is incredible. The police and authorities even were using drones to monitor the streets to restrict the movement of people. But again, considering all of this, I strongly believe that as an industry, we are extremely fortunate that health and wellness has been on top of everybody's minds. And this has undoubtedly given a boost to the natural products industry. Of course, this is far from over, and we are continuously monitoring and mitigating the situation, and not to mention adapting across the board.
Thank you. Angela?
Yeah, Ajay and Loren, it was, as you were both speaking, I'm relating to a lot of the challenges that you conveyed, and also see Gaia as, both a manufacturer, an employer, an agricultural enterprise with a certified organic farm, and a brand at really the nexus of a lot of these downstream implications. We experienced all of what you're speaking about to some degree, Jay, when you mentioned the shutdown in India. I remember exactly when that was, because we had materials at port that we couldn't get on the water, and we needed them desperately to make products that consumers were looking for to help claim some measure of empowerment for themselves over their health in a time when they felt really disempowered. So I think the brands really feel a lot of that. That certainly was true for Gaia. I'm also reflecting on the disparity between the nature of this. People have called it the great pause. I mean, life as we know it has paused. Within our industry, Nutrition Business Journal shows that herbs and botanicals are expected to grow in 2020, as many of you know, at around 20%, which is pretty unprecedented. Not in a very long time have we seen that type of growth. And it's that disparity as humans, where we have this pause in our personal life, and our children aren't going to school, and our employees are in the same situation, but our business has accelerated at a pace that is very much at odds with our maybe personal capacity or our team's personal capacity to contribute to supporting that growth. And there's a human element of that, and our farmers feel that, and our supply chain supporters feel that. So there's definitely a human intersection within the supply chain, within our businesses, that is very real, and was real for Gaia as well.
Thanks, thank you. Loren, you mentioned this as a stress test, and I wondered if, I'd love to hear each of you speak to what kind of underlying issues, tensions, barriers that COVID has brought to the surface that have been there all along, and also speak a little bit to how you've navigated that as a company, especially around supply and demand and things. Angela, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this, it definitely has highlighted for Gaia where we've invested in quality and really strong, enduring relationships within our supply chain. I mean, we have our own certified organic farm, and we do grow, roughly 20 to 25% of our biomass comes from the farm. So that's great. We also have a farm plan that supports the type of volume that we believe we will produce and sell in an average year. So, Gaia grows echinacea. We rely on our own echinacea to make many of our immune products. As you know, it's a 2-year crop. And when we sell roughly 9 months worth of inventory in a month, we can't magically produce more of a 2-year crop in a 6-week time period. So, that creates choices within any business. What do you do when, your supply chain, in that case, isn't going to support the demand that you're seeing? For Gaia, in the case of echinacea, we've been told consistently by suppliers that we have one of the highest specifications for a biomarker for that material in the entire industry. And we do that intentionally because we're producing something that, people expect an outcome from, and they should. So, then you get to the question, well, is it better to produce something below the spec and put it in a product, or do we intentionally go out of stock for a period of time? And for Gaia, we actually still have products that are out of stock because we've struggled to find echinacea that meets our specification. And that's a painful choice. It is a stress test. It's a value stress test. It's a quality stress test. Fortunately for us, not every ingredient was in that boat. That's actually the most acute example where, and for us, it also identified a weakness in our supply chain where we said, okay, this works for us until, the unexpected happens. So, we have been fortunate to identify some small scale family farmers and some other sources of echinacea that we're working to bring into our supply chain as part of this. And I think the other element of the stress test has been the people element, specifically the growers, and the effect it's had on their lives and their businesses. It has been an amplifier. COVID has been an amplifier of inequities. Where you see an inequity being magnified, and that's been true within our global supply chain as well, where we've seen people who are disadvantaged, or BIPOC farmers, for example, which are very underrepresented in the supply chain, really struggle disproportionately. As painful as that is to witness, it also has provided an example for us to double down in that area of our supply chain development too. Yeah, so just one small example of we could all, I'm sure, spend a lot of time talking about a lot of these.
Yeah, Ajay, do you want to continue?
Sure.
With that? Yeah.
I'll focus my comments on the situation in India, not only because of primary supply sources in India, but more importantly, many of the heavily trending botanicals in our industry, for example, turmeric, ashwagandha, boswellia, holy basil, bacopa, the list goes on, are grown and processed in India. The months of February and March are quite important as being harvest months for several botanicals, including turmeric and ashwagandha. Now, with the onset of COVID lockdown in India, as I mentioned earlier, on March 24th, all movement of people, goods, services came to a standstill from one day to the next. Farmers were either not able to harvest, carry out their post-harvest processing, or for crops that they had in inventory, they were very limited to no possibilities to sell these crops. On the flip side, as we deal in a global economy and the demand of these botanicals growing, as Angela mentioned, the gap between supply and demand started growing. On one end, the availability of raw botanicals and the spikes in logistics costs, because again, air freight prices shot up as much as 3 times from pre-COVID times, to manufacturers were struggling getting people to their facilities. And most of them were only allowed as essential businesses in a phased manner, so not even at 100% capacity. In the other end of the spectrum, you see customers that are needing to either push up the deliveries or increasing their requirements for raw materials. For a typical botanical extract, just to keep it in perspective again, the cost contribution from the raw botanical itself is anywhere in the range of 40 to 60%. And again, Loren mentioned earlier in the conversation, adulteration hence becomes a major concern. Now, as Verdure, of this, obviously we didn't have a crystal ball like any of us, and took some of the proactive measures of increasing our inventories of both the raw materials at the manufacturing level, as well as finished goods at our US warehouse. However, I must say that we lucked out thanks to, again, years of building strong partnerships, both at the source with the farming community, with our manufacturing partners, with our logistics partners, and then also on the customer end. Because as far as I'm concerned, all in the chain of custody need to be like-minded and kind of do their own part. For example, we take the information we have, our knowledge and experience of the on-the-ground situation, and request our customers to provide visibility, 6 months, 12 months. And in our case, we've been extremely fortunate to have that kind of visibility that then allows us to plan. Locally, India, COVID, we saw a huge surge in demand of a lot of the Ayurvedic so-called medicines locally, most it has ever seen, even in my 2 decades plus of experience, because both local practitioners and the doctors took onto these media outlets and obviously started talking about the benefits of these Ayurvedic and the traditional remedies. And as a result, there was increasing demand that was not there before. Particular demand for botanicals like holy basil, you have tinospora, licorice, andrographis, turmeric, amla, shatavari, so many that are trending in the global markets spiked, and the demand continues to grow. So this unfortunately created huge disruptions on the sourcing side of things, because on one end, the local demand in India was primarily for raw herbs or certain traditionally prepared concoctions, with less emphasis on the quality and authenticity of the botanicals. And so it became more of a seller's market, which the sellers, again, were taking full advantage of. As a result, we are seeing the raw materials which are coming adulterated. For example, if your specification calls for a leaf or an aerial plant part, and you're getting other parts of the plant like the roots and vice versa. So again, adulteration has become a big concern as a result of all these sort of post-COVID. Already it was a concern, but now it's even escalated more. So this is definitely a time where relationships and trust in your partners and transparency in the supply chain are very critical.
Loren, do you want to speak to that, and especially this kind of nexus of quality and relationships, and what's often not part of that, but sustainability, which is a long-term investment in ensuring a sustainable source of raw material. Just how this has revealed the weaknesses in the industry and what you've noticed.
Yeah, several things. One observation is that we are very dependent on Asia. That's historically true, and it will continue to be our number one supplier. We were approached by the U.S. Mexico Chamber of Commerce prior to COVID, just before, and they said Mexico has every growing zone that you need to grow almost any kind of plant that you use in your industry. We, Mexico, are your neighbor. We'd like to be considered a partner going forward. That has big advantages, and from the standpoint of proximity, there's more shared culture, I would say. I would love to see more growing in the United States. I think the more that people see agricultural practice in the United States, I've been to Gaia's farms. It's a magical experience. As I've traveled in my work, and as we all have, when you get into the fields and into the forests, this changes people. That makes real believers and enthusiasts and defenders of the plants. This also concerns me because we don't see the people who are doing the hard work in these faraway places. And when we got into the critical stress-driven supply problems, we forced the hard ethical decision down to those people that were growing. They're the least able, they have the fewest resources financially. Somehow we that have done well from our side need to find a way to push capital and resources much farther down into the supply chain. It really has to be a community-driven approach if we're going to hope to meet the go forward demand. What we really want to do is to have continuous improvements in quality, but that means that we have to have greater control over the actual growing and cultivation of the plants themselves, and that we have to be wise stewards for those that are collected. So my strongest sense of things is we need to see these people. One thing that we all lament is that we can't be together physically, but now we're doing this. We're all seeing each other virtually, which has saved us from a business standpoint, and I think that transition is probably permanent. But what I lament is that we don't get our dirt under our fingernails, and I think that we're too cerebral about this whole process. It's really hard. It is really hard if you're trying to meet the demands of what nature is offering. And one observation is, as we're all sitting home, a lot of people are growing gardens, and for the first time, they're actually able to plant and follow their crop and to harvest their tomatoes and zucchinis and so on. Otherwise, we would all be traveling, and that we never are really a part of a growing season. And that's certainly been true for us at home. And then you see what happens when bugs show up in a bad storm and winds wreck half your little garden, and you realize this is really hard, and that you imagine that how fragile this system really is. So education is very high on my list, especially as those that own our industry come from venture capital, backgrounds in law, finance, and business, and the traditional historic connection to the land, to the plants, to the healing traditions. There's been a growing separation. And I would love to get a busload of those executives and take them out on a week's road trip and have them go out and go pick saw palmetto berries for a while. That'd be an education.
Absolutely. Send them all a copy of Braiding Sweetgrass, among other beautiful books.
Yeah, I just read that book yesterday, Angela. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some great comments in the chat here about, and Loren, speaking to your comments around education, I think get to the heart of sort of empowerment, like what do we do in the era of globalization to also be focused locally? How do we think about hemisphere, and how do we bring it closer to home even if we're not there? I mean, Gaia has not had a strong sourcing presence coming out of China. We really it's not been part of our supply chain. There have been minor things, but for the most part, it's not a big part of our mix. India is absolutely a big part of our supply chain. Our Ayurvedic herbs and many of those, Ajay, that you listed, we have strong partners in India who we rely on. And part of what Gaia's been looking at as we've explored this question of diversification of supply chain, supporting people, educating, bringing things closer to home from a logistics standpoint, and then also, how we prepare for the next crisis, which, yes, we see as climate change. Absolutely. Education is a big part of that. We totally agree. And we've started to explore a small grants program. We just actually gave our first small grant in 2019 within the supply chain specifically. to a producer who's focused on agroforestry growth of a couple of traditional Ayurvedic herbs, and they're in Nicaragua. And it's not US soil, we're doing that too, but this one specifically, it was looking at how they teach local farmers in Nicaragua to engage in really productive, regeneratively focused agroforestry practices and grow herbs there that could meet the demand of partners. And, you know, from a percentage of supply chain standpoint, we're still talking about a relatively low part of our mix, but we see that as serving a couple purposes. One, we're empowering farmers in a way that helps them, you know, go beyond the living wage. And we're also supporting the health of the soil. I mean, the herbs that we're buying, if they're not any good, then our medicine, our product isn't any good. So we're ensuring that we have a good quality source of well-grown botanicals that, you know, we trust and that have a story that aligns with our purpose of supporting people, planet, and plants, all, you know, as connected parts of a healthy ecosystem. So I totally agree. I think education is part of that. And it's not to say that we have that cracked. I think we have a long way to go, but that's some of the experimentation we're looking at, is investing in communities to help us address a couple of those specific problems that have been highlighted right now.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, yes, absolutely, education is key. Botanicals that we deal with, and I know you do as well, Angela, you're looking at certain constituents within those botanicals. And to have consistency in those constituents, it's absolutely critical that there is that knowledge sharing between what we need as buyers and processors and the farmers in that community. Because you know, they're going to look at a crop and they're going to think, okay, it looks great, okay, you know, it's healthy, but what about those constituents, and are you exhausting the soil and the rotation of the crops and things like that? So yeah, I mean, as Verdure, we've taken a lot of initiatives over the years to really start aligning with the growing communities to ensure the consistency and the sustainability of these botanicals, especially considering that we need to hit those targets every time we supply that raw material to our customers.
Ajay, I wondered if you could speak a little bit, because as an ingredient supplier, you're the closest to the farmers and producers and the least visible from the consumers. And you compete with a lot of other ingredient suppliers with different specifications and standards around investing in rural communities and in the soil. So can you talk some about what conditions help you invest in those communities as much as you can, to do the best job you can to source, you know, to me it seems it comes down to price, but what stories need to be told from your point of view?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this comes with a discipline and obviously a vision to understand, you know, what is it that's going to sustain the industry moving forward, and the communication and the information gathering from our customers and the brand owners is important to understand what is it that they're looking for. You know, whether it's a specific compound or composition within the botanical or within that ingredient, that extract, or other characteristics of that they're interested in. Because there's always this notion of, okay, we want it to be the same color every batch and every lot, and that just, you know, in a natural product, that's not possible. And then working with the growing communities. So of course it's a process, it takes time, it's a relationship building, a sort of structure that you know, you have to establish, which again, as Verdure, we've done this over the past 2 decades. And really being transparent to all sides of the spectrum. So you're being extremely transparent to the farmers and to the growers, and making them understand, you know, what is it that we need in the form of this botanical, the growing practices. So we have a team that actually is assigned to manage and monitor what these farmers are doing with respect to the growing of those crops. The harvesting, the post-harvesting, for example, is extremely critical, because you may have a good crop, but if the post-harvesting practices are not sound or not established, then you're going to lose some of those components, or you're going to incorporate impurities that are not needed. And also that's going to give rise to adulteration with other parts of the plant or other species. So a lot of this has to do with the engagement with the farming community, having guidelines in place, and again, coming back to that education needs to be there for sure. And then understanding what is it that we require from them that they're clear on, and then we can transfer that to the customers for their requirements.
So it takes a lot of investment of time, right, and resources. And can you talk a little bit about that and the price pressure, because there's a price pressure in the storefront, and then and specific ways to support farming communities, like longer term contracts, which would mean longer term contracts through the supply network, right? Which would perhaps come from brands. Can you talk some, I'm not sure whom of you could best speak to this, but really specific practices that, unless they're implemented, are barriers to, that mean the stress test in the future is just going to happen again. Like, what are the barriers to addressing inequities, the health of the soil, stewarding the wild plants and communities? And what should consumers and companies know how to help make those more possible? Who wants to take that? Loren, do you?
I mean, I think price is a huge issue here, and as a culture, specifically American culture, there's sort of a race to the bottom led by e-commerce behemoths, but consumers participate in that, and I mean, price is a massive driver of this. And so, when Gaia is purchasing raw materials and there's a scarcity, we're already seeing, in some cases, we're paying a little more for them. And thankfully, we haven't seen, because of the strength of our supplier relationships, a massive shift. But I would expect that once harvest comes in, which we're right in the middle of that right now, we're going to start to see more of it, especially on certain botanicals like elderberry. So we're thinking about, from a price perspective, all right, we're not going to compromise the quality of the materials we're buying, which means we may end up paying more. And somewhere in the value chain that shows up. It's not, the cost will be borne either by Gaia or it gets passed on to the consumer in some way. And there's a tension, especially I think within herbs and botanicals, around how do we talk about quality and the need for quality in a way that we're all in this together, right? So we don't want to throw stones. But how do we talk about it in a way that's productive? I think that's a real challenge for our industry overall. Gaia has a program called Meet Your Herbs, where someone can go and they can see how the plant's harvested and how it's extracted with water and alcohol and what's used there. And that's important, but I think the piece that is not still being addressed is, a consumer doesn't necessarily know better when they pick something up and it says elderberry and it has all the right badges and stickers and claims and uses the right marketing language. How do they know how the farmer, was treated, or how the quality of the material was? Or, a question was asked in the chat: are there rating systems in place? This is where it gets really complicated. Like, for me personally, I think benefit corporation status, B Corp status for any business, whether it's a supplier or a brand, helps put some of that in place, but it's not the only answer. It's definitely a matrix, and that I don't have a good answer for that at this point. I think that's something, consumer understanding of quality as it relates to price is a challenge that we're going to need to continue to confront, so people can gain confidence in our industry and continue to feel empowered and turn more into your point when they're feeling like something's happening in our society where they're undergoing a health challenge, or like there's just stress for them, that they want to turn to herbs and botanicals and dietary supplements as a place that, yes, this is a choice I can make for my family. If the quality's not high, they're not going to feel that way.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think, again, being in industry for a couple of decades, talking about botanicals and botanical-based ingredients, they were treated as commodities. And now you're in this time where, the FDA has come in 12 years ago, implementing their GMPs. The level of compliance, the quality control measures, the certifications, all of that. I mean, it's a night and a day difference from what it was even a decade ago. So of course, all these things cost. There's a cost associated with it, right? And so yes, your raw material prices are going to go up. And then on top of that, you bring into the picture the demand, the surge in demand, both in these local, talking about India, locally in India, as well as the global demand. So again, that's going to put a lot of pressure on pricing. We can see that because and you're not talking about 10, 20, 30%, you're talking about doubling of raw material prices. So you're talking about doubling of the raw botanical itself. And now you're extracting those botanicals, so you can imagine the value addition in terms of the price for those ingredients that are going to manufacturers like Gaia that are implementing and have to put it out to the consumer. So like Angela mentioned, yes, price is definitely a major concern, especially, and then how do you kind of differentiate yourself from somebody else who's obviously not invested or vested into a lot of these type of activities.
Loren, do you want to contribute?
This is a vexing problem because price is always king, right or wrong, and that's wrong. But that is the fact. I've been wondering more recently. We have to think in a different way because beating that fundamental, what is your bottom price, your best price, is always going to be in the equation. That's being forced down to the grower and the farmer level. The thing that should be changed immediately is U.S. policy regarding what crops are subsidized. From our point of view, all the wrong things are being subsidized: dairy, meat, and so on. Why not organic agriculture? The other thing is to do what started 500 years ago, was to share risk. I think it is possible to create a risk model that farmers that are always at such a high risk of a crop failure, and as we've seen in the hemp industry, that those that planted in good faith, many of those farmers are in serious trouble. Not their fault. They planted in good faith and that there was no market for it. I think we have to de-risk the agricultural part of our industry. We can buy insurance for our enterprises as brands. You can insure your factory and a lot of risks. Our farmers that grow our products have virtually no way to do that. I think we have enough capital, enough wealth, just in our industry in the US. We could certainly create a vehicle to help farmers to provide the incentives to reduce the risks. And I think that's a far more equitable way of one step to tell them that they're meaningful to us, that they're part of the overall risks that we should bear collectively. It's only one of many steps that need to be taken, but we have to be thinking in terms of new things. The problems we're dealing with are going to be new problems. And we're going to have to be prepared to be very creative very quickly. Again, I just have this underlying feeling that whatever is coming at us is going to be at a pace that will be breathtaking and very difficult to manage if we don't think about it now and do some scenarios and try some things out, see what works, what doesn't work. If we start losing the last resource, which is the land itself, it's clean water, clean land, clean air, where do we go from there?
Yeah, I appreciate the comments here that, one in particular, Sarah mentioned that as Gen Z and millennials take over, this sort of consumer space, not to say that baby boomers and Gen X, don't care as much, but I think there's definitely an ethos within Gen Z and millennials that their measure of success is different. So, that could be for them personally. And I wonder, what could we as businesses and as an industry learn from that, I don't think we can use the same measures of success moving forward. And that, you know, that will create some tension, especially as, you know, Loren, I think you mentioned there's more venture capital and you know, multinationals that enter this space, and you know, many of them are traded, and many of them have a horizon, and they're, you know, it's a type of capital system that demands a certain return. Nature doesn't work that way. You know, and you know, what could we learn to model our businesses more like nature in a more sustainable, more regenerative way? And could consumer sentiment drive that? You know, that, I think that's a macro question. And within that are a lot of individual choices about how we empower farmers to help us solve our supply chain questions and issues, and how we grow. Gaia, you know, Gaia from a business standpoint, we operate a farm not because it's profitable. I mean, I promise you, the farm P&L is not something you want to see, but we do it because we believe that we can produce certain, we can grow certain types of plants better than anyone else for our specific needs. And that's a commitment we have to making products that we know people take for health outcomes. But you know, that type of mindset around what measures, what constitutes success is a big business shift. And that's one that would really be transformative for our industry if we could encourage that. And it's more in line with nature. It's a more regenerative, whole system, living system way of approaching things. So I wonder if that consumer, that changing consumer, helps to usher that in. It's a big question.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Another thing that COVID has made quite clear is that we're all connected. And our health is totally dependent on the health of everyone else, which we've known, you know, that's what nature has shown us. But the structure of the industry is each company is tackling these issues on its own. And I'd be interested in each of you, in any thoughts you have around ways companies can collaborate, or how there can be more working across or in pre-competitive ways to tackle these issues of healthy soil and equity throughout the network.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in. I'd love to see at the trade association level more, you know, more around, hey, how could we, you know, what is the botanical that we know the farmers are most at risk financially? You know, Ajay, to your point, like this is for many of them a real, like, living, you know, quality of life challenge. And could we, what type of empowerment program could we create that isn't, you know, okay, here's a gift, but more here's a way that that we could support a sustainable system that empowers our supply chains and the farmers. I think absolutely, and to your point, I mean, we're all grappling with a slightly different version of the same problem, and often within actually even the same botanical. I mean, you know, raise your hand if you have an elderberry supply chain question. There's a lot of us. So I think that from a trade standpoint would be, I think, one beautiful exploration that could happen.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I can jump in. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think, you know, you've got different tiers in the supply chain, and then you've got obviously the chain of custody from the manufacturers to the suppliers of the ingredients, to the brand owners, in some cases contract manufacturers, and then brand owners. And I think that you know, it'd be good to see all of these aligned, right? All of these being transparent to each other, and understanding the complexities involved on both ends of the spectrum, right? Whether it's the brands dealing with their challenges, the manufacturers of supplements and their challenges, and then of course the ingredient suppliers and manufacturers, and then all the way down to the ground level. What are those challenges? And you know, simply speaking, we do a lot of communication with our customers. we are extremely proactive, but we are also very adamant. We ask them a lot of questions, and we want to know ahead of time, if possible, what are they thinking, so that we can plan, right? When it comes to, just the harvest timing and the seasons, and letting them know 2, 3, 4 months in advance, or whenever we can, give them that visibility. Because again, understanding that it takes several months to plan and produce these ingredients. So I think understanding all across the chain, what the challenges are, what the expectations are, really goes very far in terms of minimizing a lot of these challenges, and ensuring that the customers get what they want, and then obviously the growers, harvesters are familiar with your habits in terms of, okay, how much you need, when you need, and all of this comes really handy. So to me, it's really having that open-ended communication. And some of the challenges we do see is sometimes it's brand owners or manufacturers of supplements, the sharing of that information, right? That critical information that they may have, and I'm not saying that it's always there, but that they may have, but they may not think that it's crucial to the suppliers or to the manufacturers of the raw ingredients. And I think that that's another important aspect to make their lives easier. And I think that can also save costs, because we have, we are not in the spot business, to be honest. We cannot operate in a spot business environment anymore. We have to have commitments or visibility or contracts from our customers so that we can plan ahead, because a lot of these are specialized ingredients. We have to ensure that we can get the right types of raw materials in the harvest periods, or when they're best available at the most competitive pricing, and then be able to produce it to specifications. So I think that that's something that has worked well for us, I would say, where we have enhanced the communication with our customers and gathered a lot of information that has in turn helped them in doing what they need to do.
Yeah, Ajay, I'm curious, there was a question earlier that came up in the Q&A that I just saw relative to 2021 and and so especially on your side of the business, what specific challenges would you expect to see persist as we move well into next year, even with the type of planning that so many of us on the manufacturing side are trying to do a great job at? Are there specific botanicals or issues that you're going to expect to see carry forward?
Yeah, so we are dealing with COVID, and then again, going back to India, our major supply source. Now you're talking about monsoons in India, and monsoons have created havoc, lots of flooding in North India, South India, West India, East India, all over the place. And this is also a time when a lot of these crops are planted prior to the onset of the monsoons, and then harvested at the end of the year. So you got crops like turmeric, you got crops like ashwagandha, you got crops like holy basil, bacopa. All of these, again, heavily trending botanicals that have been planted or will be planted, but there's all these extreme climate conditions, within India at the moment. So what I see moving forward is we're going to continue to see challenges with respect to both the availability as well as the price of these botanicals, because the demands are going through the roof, and there's only so much available. And then how do you tap into the right qualities of these raw materials that you need to meet with your specifications? So I don't want to be kind of too pessimistic, but at the same time I want to be realistic in the sense that we haven't seen the worst of it. I think that there is a lot that will come moving forward, as I think Loren alluded to that as well early in the conversation, that there's a lot of challenges that will unfold. And from a raw material standpoint, I think yes, we do see challenges. Again, the planning is going to be a critical aspect of this. So the more you can plan, the more mitigation that you can do for your risk, the better it is. And easier said than done, but yes, there do seem to be challenges that are up ahead of us.
We just have 5 minutes left, and Lauren, I'm curious if each of you, and you take 1 minute, but if you want to say what to you is so you've talked about a lot of things that require risk. To be transparent is a big risk. What's at stake? Why is it important to take those risks? Lauren, do you want to start? What's at stake for you now, personally and in your work?
Yeah, I think personally, just one observation is that I've got 4.2 million miles on Delta Airlines, and I haven't been on a plane in 6 months, and I couldn't be happier. I've realized how much travel has taken out of me physically and emotionally, and to be literally disconnected from the earth. And so I think personally, I'm changing how I'm going to work. I'm not going to travel nearly as much. Far better for the planet, far better for me. I think many others feel the same way. That's going to require that we think differently about how we socialize. I really dislike the term social distancing. It should be physical distancing. What we need is social collective consciousness and a way to support each other. Our industry, I believe, is a magnet to bring that kind of good emotion where we have high principles, and protecting the plants to me is a high cause. It's something I want to spend more time working on, which is why I'm so happy with what you've done and what ABC is now helping carry forward. Is the plants cannot speak for themselves. We can. We are their defenders. And I would say, life career, this is something I can do and would like to do more of, is to advocate for the plants. I would like our association to do the same. We were the first to embrace and endorse Sustainable Herbs program, and we've always been a strong supporter of ABC. I think it is, so personally, to reorient my time saved from so much travel and put it to the higher causes, because I'm convinced that the legacies that we all want to leave will be how to manage these transformative events, many of which will be traumatic. The next generation is going to have a real challenge on its hands, just dealing with, I would say, society, with planetary changes. As was alluded to early in the conversation, is that there are some deep inequities that were revealed through COVID-19, that there's a tremendous underserved population just in the United States that have no access really to the quality of products and care and food that we do. And that has to be addressed. That is a fundamental right, in my opinion. And our industry should be leading the way. And I think that if we make the personal commitments of change, to get off an airplane and stay off airplanes, that's not a small deal. It may sound like it, but it's really not. From a business standpoint, people have always thought, I have to be in front of my customer. So this will require people to deeply think about the nature of work and where and how we work. The last point I would just repeat is that we have to think about how those of us that live, I would say, in a safe environment, physically, personally, financially, we have to step out of our safe zone and take the hand of those that are living in far more riskier environments than we are. And that means the farmers and the growers in countries that are far less advantaged than our own. That's a personal commitment that heads of companies can make and investors and owners can make. And I think we're derelict if we don't do that. And that we will pay for that from a business point of view. It's good business to do the right thing, certainly in this case.
Yeah, thank you. Angela?
Yeah, what's at risk, I think, is trust. We, as an industry, I mean, we've never had more consumers and people taking our products, and whether it's, in any channel, I mean, we're seeing just such an uptick in the way that people are engaging with herbs. And for many, it's like maybe the first time they've taken an herbal product. And, we are the sort of the guardians and the carriers of that. If they have a less than great experience, if they don't feel like they can trust our quality or the outcome, I think that's at risk in an environment where the supply chain is under so much pressure. This is a clarion call, I think, for our industry that we can respond to, and really question, like, how do we measure success within supply chain? That we probably could spend another 3 hours talking about that, but I think the risk really is ensuring that we protect trust and the trust of the people who we make products for and we serve, and the farmers who grow them.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Ajay?
Well, it's been difficult to find a good balance between working, which has been mostly remote, and managing personal lives. The safety and wellness, in our case, for our employees and their loved ones is paramount, and with that comes the ability to be flexible. I think Loren alluded to that, which as a company we have adapted so far and will continue to do so. With the recent and projected growth of industry, sustainability will be paramount all through the supply chain, the chain of custody, starting with quality, the consistency, compliance, the risk mitigation practices that we have in place, and valuable information gathering and sharing, and commitments from brand owners to fulfill their needs in a timely manner, as I mentioned. And last but not least, for everyone involved, ensuring that we are not making outlandish claims for benefits of these botanicals, rather staying as true as we can to the tradition, and of course that they're scientific evidence.
Thank you. Thank you all so much, and thank you everyone who's joined in on this conversation. We'll continue the threads and we'll share the recording, and it'll be there tomorrow or so, and then we'll continue the conversation in different ways. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. So I think we're